Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 262 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book is called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. Go and pick that up on Amazon today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there's nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, one of the reasons why I love working with fraternities and sororities, and there are many, but one of the biggest reasons is that essentially the college students today, they are working to end and find the cure to cancer. I mean, how amazing is that? Raising tons of money so that way they can be the ones to say that, yes, we are the generation to beat cancer. These are organizations like Sigma Chi, for example. And my father has multiple myeloma, which is cancer of the blood. And so it motivates me to help build up the fraternity and sorority community, knowing that Gen Z is going to be the generation to cure cancer. There's nothing more motivational to me than that. And so understand that I am your biggest fan when you go out and raise that money, because like my dad always says, if he can just make it long enough, if he can live long enough, eventually we will find the cure to cancer. And so along those lines, I want to talk to our next guest. Her name is Monica Bryant. Monica is a cancer rights attorney, a speaker, and an author. She's dedicated to improving access to quality information on healthcare-related issues. She's the co-founder and chief operating officer for Triage Cancer, which is a national nonprofit organization that provides education on the practical and the legal issues that may impact individuals who are diagnosed with cancer, as well as their caregivers, which many times is family. Monica is the co-author of the first and only book, and it's on cancer rights law, published by the American Bar Association in 2018. In 2019, Monica received a 40 Under 40 in Cancer Award, and in 2015, she was awarded the Legacy Advocate Award by a leading young adult cancer organization. She is an adjunct law professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago School of Law, teaching a class on cancer rights. Throughout her career, she has provided more than 1,000 educational seminars for individuals who have been diagnosed with cancer, their caregivers, lawyers, advocates, healthcare professionals, elected officials, and of course, the general public. Welcome to the show, Monica.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, it's my pleasure. What you're talking about is super important. I think there's a lot of young people listening that are probably like, cancer, like that's something that old people are going to get. We're going to dispel that myth completely. And if nothing else, you might be the caregiver. You might be the person like me who's the son or daughter caring for somebody who is going through this. And I think your words of wisdom is going to be such a relief to our students, knowing that there are resources out there like you to help them through this time. And so I want to go all the way back. Let's go back to the time of UC Santa Barbara for your undergraduate experience. Let me tell you, that campus is absolutely stunning. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful campuses I've ever been to. So I get why you might want to go there, but what made you choose Santa Barbara? I'll ask the question.
Well, first of all, it wasn't that long ago. So don't age me unnecessarily here, Michael. So I am a native Californian. I am actually a born and bred Bruin. So I was literally born at UCLA. I did summer camps at UCLA. But when it came to choosing my college, I really wanted to have an experience that was different than what I had for my first 18 years of life. And so I was looking around at other options. I looked East Coast, I looked Midwest, but the lure of in-state tuition with an excellent education was just too much for me to give up. And I got to tell you, being that close to the ocean certainly didn't hurt.
Oh my God, I would never go to class. I would be looking at the ocean 24/7. That's the big part that I don't understand. I mean, I went to go visit and do a speaking engagement at Long Beach. And these guys are literally living on the beach. Like they have a house on the beach where they can just go over the rails and not even hurt themselves because they would land on the sand. I mean, that's how close to the beach these students are living. And I'm like, I'm looking at this view. I'm like, why would you go to class? Like, there's no reason. It's stunning.
So, well, listen, I made it out, so I went to class enough, apparently.
There you go. You made it. So it worked out. That's really, really good. And you also graduated from the George Washington University Law School. You served as a law clerk at the US Senate. And what you were doing was researching and drafting questions on the nominations of Judge John Roberts for Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court. So, given how political these nominations have become, certainly in light of, reproductive rights right now, and that's kind of the big debate. I mean, can you give us some insight on the differences that you notice between then drafting questions on this nomination and then now?
It is night and day.
Yeah.
Now, certainly I don't have the insider's view that I was so fortunate to have back then, but the overall discourse that we are seeing happening in Congress today is so far from what it was when I was there in the early 2000s. The senators at the time were these giants. And one of the things that was so inspiring to me as a law student was you had these people from polar political spectrums, but when they came together in a room, they were collegial, they were respectful. They spoke to each other with respect and honor. And unfortunately, just when I'm able to see on the news, like that's been chipped away. And I think that is really, unfortunately, trickling down to the laws and the policies that are coming out of Congress. I think we certainly saw it this week in what happened at the Supreme Court. And sort of a reversal in what most of us who have gone through law school expect with respect to precedent. So I think we're in for a rocky road for the next couple of years if we keep getting decisions like that. But I am hopeful. I am always hopeful. I think that we are a nation that is still a work in progress. And I certainly hope that for anyone who's listening, who is feeling disillusioned or frustrated with the system, that they do the most important thing that they can do to affect change, which is vote. Yeah. So the second you turn 18, make sure that you are registered to vote. And whether you're doing that because you've changed residences and you're doing it where you're living now, or if you're voting absentee back at home, if you went away to school, you need to be having your voice heard. And that is one of the most impactful ways to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I really thought that Roe v. Wade was just settled law. I mean, we were living with that for 49 years. It wasn't something that was decided yesterday. And so, I guess for me, it's really frustrating to watch the nominations for the US Supreme Court have these people, answer the questions one way, and then they get on the court, and then it's the exact opposite. So, I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, just trying to represent and be true to yourself during that nominations process, and then having that carry over when you're sitting on the bench in the US Supreme Court. I mean, there's a huge disconnect there. I mean, does that bother you?
I mean, to my core, because we have created this system where cagey answers can be given, and then once seated on the court, they can basically do whatever they want. And I suppose that it's always been like that. But, there was a nomination way back when for a nominee, Bork, and he was actually pretty honest. And because of his honesty, he wasn't confirmed. And so I think that really set the tone for, the next several justices, that if you want to be sat, you really do have to be careful with how you answer. And I think it is unfortunate because the Supreme Court has become more political than it was supposed to be in our original systems of checks and balances. They are supposed to be impartial. Precedent is supposed to mean something. I just watched a clip with Senator McConnell saying, well, they've reversed precedent in the past, in the civil rights movement and Brown v. Board of Ed. And, there's history for reversing precedent. And when you start comparing things like reversing laws that protect segregation and reversing laws when it comes to somebody's bodily autonomy and comparing those two things, that hurts me to my core as a woman, as a parent, as an American. But again, I think the only way to change that is to make sure that we are putting the people in the position to vote for these justices that we respect and that have shown they're honorable by their actions. And so, at the end of the day, yes, it's about president, but those senators have an incredible amount of power. It was a senator who blocked President Obama's nominee. Had that been allowed to go forward, we'd have a very different court than we do right now.
Wow. It makes me sad because the nomination process that you were a part of, it just feels to me like a sham now, right? It's a show. It doesn't really reflect what these people believe. And so now I have no faith in that process, in the nomination process, and the research and drafting questions is almost for nothing. So that part of me is really sad, and I'm bothered by what's happening as well as you are. I think as Americans, we should all be bothered that we don't have that autonomy over our own body. That is just mind-blowing to me. But enough about that. We can probably go on about that. Let's get to the core. I mean, obviously, cancer is, the thing that you specialize in. You're dedicated to providing individuals who are coping with cancers, their caregivers, and healthcare professionals about the practical and the legal issues that can arise after you get a cancer diagnosis. So I'm just curious, what made you specialize in this particular area of the law since 2009?
To be perfectly honest, I fell into it.
Mm.
So I was working in Congress as a legislative counsel, loved what I was doing, really felt like I was in the thick of it. And then I met my now spouse, and he happened to be not from DC. And so personal reasons had me sort of leave that career. And I was left in a place where it was like, okay, what's next? And I happened to move during the recession, which is not a great time to get a job as a lawyer. And so I really had to be creative in terms of thinking about, well, what are the things that get me out of bed in the morning? Where can I be helpful? I have a fundamental belief that we are all tasked with a responsibility to make the world a better place. We all do that in different ways. Some people become doctors, some people become scientists, some people, are tradespeople who, thank God for them, keep our cities running. I became a lawyer. So how can I make the world a better place? Well, I have what I now realize is a little bit of a talent in explaining to lay audiences complex topics. And the unfortunate reality is most of us have been touched by cancer one way or another. A family member, a friend, somebody in our community, a celebrity that we've cared about. Cancer is something we've all at least had a peripheral experience with. And most things about our healthcare are in fact rooted in the law. From what drugs we have access to what hospitals we get to go to how much we're going to pay for things. It's all rooted in the law. And so I really sort of came around to there's a unique opportunity and there's a gap in explaining to people the relevant laws for how to get through cancer, hopefully out of financial ruin, but being able to access the care that you need.
Got it. Okay, that's very good. I like that answer. And you co-authored the only book on this topic. It's called Cancer Rights Law: An Interdisciplinary Approach, and it was published by the American Bar Association in 2018. The reality is that you shouldn't need a lawyer in order to get through a serious medical condition like cancer. Can you talk to us about how frequent that diagnosis might be in younger people, and what are your rights when you get this diagnosis?
So to your point earlier, most young people don't really think about cancer until it touches them. But the unfortunate reality is about 90,000 adolescents and young adults get diagnosed with cancer each year.
Wow.
That is not
Yeah.
insignificant when you stop and think about it. Now, adolescents and young adults in the cancer community is frequently abbreviated as AYAs. And that ranges from 15 to 39 usually. So that is a pretty big range. But what you see now with cancer is that on most situations, it's not a short-lived thing that you're coping with. Thanks to scientific advances, cancer has become more of a chronic illness than it has been in the past. But even if someone's done with cancer care, too often there are long-term side effects or late-term side effects. There's something we refer to in the cancer community as scanxiety. So once you're sort of done with active treatment, you have to keep getting scanned to see if it's coming back. And so even if somebody's diagnosed at a young age, it might be something that they're dealing with for a significant portion of their lives. And I have to tell you, every day we hope that someday we'll put ourselves out of business, that you won't need this legal information, that our system will become less complex and easier to navigate. But that's not happening yet. So in the meantime, and by we, I am referring to my sister, who is also a cancer rights attorney, and she and I co-founded Triage Cancer, and we co-authored the book together. And we did that because there aren't enough cancer rights attorneys. There are not enough people dealing or helping with these types of topics. And so what's a way to deal with that? Get them earlier when they're in law school. And so we wrote this book, and the book can really be used by anybody. So it can be used by someone who's been diagnosed, a caregiver. We get a lot of healthcare professionals who are trying to help navigate their patients through these issues, like social workers and nurses. And then she and I have both used the book in our law school classes. But believe it or not, this is how fast things change. It's already outdated in some places. Yeah. And so we're working on a second edition and hopefully going to make it even more user-friendly for people, because what we know to be true is that the people who learn certain pieces of information closer to diagnosis end up doing better.
Gotcha. Good advice there. Now, let's assume for a moment that your health insurance denies a claim. Okay. What are the 3 steps that you should take immediately when something like that happens?
So I have to tell you, claim denials are something that happens so often. Our insurance industry is a business. They are a part of the system. They're an important part of the system, but at the end of the day, they're a business. They are, in fact, in it to make money. And so when there's an opportunity to deny a claim, they will. The important piece for listeners to recognize, and whether this is a denial that you've gotten or maybe your parents or other family members, is as consumers, we have the right to appeal that denial. We don't have to take no for an answer. So if you get that denial, step 1 is understand why it was denied. So is it an administrative error, like, your name is spelled wrong, or are they saying something is experimental or investigational? So that could be like if you're in a clinical trial. Sometimes they'll say it's not a covered benefit or you're not eligible for that service. And that's typically about something like, oh, the screening mandates are only for women, but you happen to be a man with family history of breast cancer or some other genetic cancer. And so understanding why it was denied takes you to step number 2. And step number 2 is to gather the evidence as to why something's medically necessary. And that's typically going to take the help of a healthcare team. So getting information about any genetic tests you've taken or studies or research that's been done to talk about why that drug is useful for your diagnosis. And then the third step after filing the appeal is to communicate with the providers. So to say to them, listen, I know it got denied. I know you're sending me your bill. I can't pay the bill right now because I'm going through the appeals process. And can you hear that?
No, you're good.
Okay. And keep them up to date with what's going on, that you're going through the appeals process. Sometimes you have to go to a second stage, which is called an external appeal, which thanks to the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, we all have the right to do. And so it's about communication, it's about gathering evidence, and it's about not taking no for an answer.
Got it. That's all amazing information. And you know what? I mean, this cancer diagnosis that so many people get every single year, that shouldn't mean that you have to declare bankruptcy and basically be out on the streets. So if you get a diagnosis of a serious medical condition like cancer, how do you avoid financial ruin in this country?
It can be challenging, particularly if you don't already have the right health insurance policy for you. But I think step 1 is to check whatever health insurance policy you do have and make sure that you're seeing in-network providers. And that's along the spectrum of care. So not just the oncologists that you've been referred to, but any labs you go to, any prescription drugs that you take. That in-network piece is really, really crucial. If you don't have insurance, get insurance. There are lots of different ways to get insurance now, particularly if you're under the age of 18 or if you have a lower income. In most states, you can access Medicaid. We now have the state health insurance marketplaces, again, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, where we can get health insurance and financial assistance to buy health insurance. So health insurance is a key factor there. The second piece would be if you're working, then to understand what your employment rights are. So there are a number of different employment rights that can help you stay at work through treatment, return to work after treatment, or take time off. Unfortunately, many times that time off is unpaid. So having something in place like disability insurance can be useful. Disability insurance is a tricky one, I will fully admit, because it's another expense. And most young people don't think they're ever going to need it. But the reality is 1 in 4 20-year-olds will experience a disability in their lifetimes. And so when we stop to think about the number of people who need to use it versus the number of people who have it, disability insurance is a topic that's not talked about enough. And what disability insurance does is if you aren't able to work due to your diagnosis, it actually replaces a portion of your lost wages.
That's huge.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are really the key pieces. I would also say that some of the more practical pieces that most of us don't think about, like budgeting, keeping track of your credit score, negotiating payment plans if you have debt you can't pay, those are all really important things to do, particularly if you have high medical bills.
That's great points. I love every single part of it. Great advice. I also want to talk about Adulting 101. What do you think the college students who are listening right now need to start thinking about in terms of planning ahead with their finances and insurance? I mean, you mentioned here disability insurance, which I completely agree with. Life insurance is another thing that maybe it's not on their radar, but might be a good idea because the premiums are going to be so low right now. So what should our college students be thinking about for the future?
Well, I think there's life after college. And many college students are either on their parents' health insurance or maybe a student health insurance plan. Don't assume that your first job is going to offer health insurance. There are many employers now that aren't offering health insurance. And so understanding what your options are, like the health insurance marketplaces, can be vital. And the time to start thinking about it is not graduation day. It's actually a little bit before then, before you lose coverage, because even outside of a cancer diagnosis, you can get into a surfing accident, you can get into a car accident, right? Like you can fall down the stairs and break an ankle, and that can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. And so that health insurance piece is really important. And I will admit, even me coming out of high school or out of college, like I had no idea. And I was just lucky enough to stumble into some good plans, with the federal government, but that's just not the case for everybody. The other thing I really think people need to be thinking about is estate planning. About 70% of Americans don't even have the most basic estate planning document, which is a will. And it is so sad when we talk to families who have lost a loved one and there was no will, and now all of the administrative hassle they have to deal with, plus the emotional piece, it's pretty awful. And so sometimes when I'm talking with younger audiences, they'll say like, well, why would I make a will? I don't own anything. And that might be true. But wills aren't necessarily about just putting in things that are worth a huge dollar amount. Many of us have things that are very sentimental to us. And so thinking about, well, what do you own that you might want to pass down, even if it isn't worth a whole lot if you were to go sell it? The other piece of it is about medical decision-making. And these are documents that you can create that expresses your wishes for healthcare if you weren't able to make them. So if you're in a car accident, you're in a coma, what are the things that you would or wouldn't want? And then you can also name somebody to make decisions for you. Don't assume that your parents are just automatically going to get to make those decisions for you if you're over 18. I also know a lot of people who have different preferences than maybe their parents might have for their medical care. And so creating these documents, even though I know many college students are sort of feeling invincible and thinking, estate planning is something I don't have to do till much, much later. Thinking through the fact that none of us are promised tomorrow, and we never know what's going to happen in our lives. And just doing a little bit of thinking and planning to make sure that if something awful happened, you're protected.
Great advice. Very, very good. I think college students, you're right, aren't thinking about their wills. They're not thinking about end of life decisions. And those things we need to just get down on paper. So that way, if something happens that we didn't expect, at least we know our wishes are going to come true. Now, you are living in Chicago, and I know there is some great food in Chicago, starting with deep dish pizza. But I want to know your favorite restaurant in Chicago so I can go check it out the next time I'm in town.
Man, that's the hardest question you've asked today. See, because I would categorize it like best pizza or best hole in the wall or best hot dog. You're really talking about like favorite restaurant, like where do I try to go on my birthday? I would say Maple and Ash. It is a sort of higher end steakhouse in downtown Chicago. Fantastic vibe, great smoked crab, really, really good food.
That sounds amazing. I will definitely go and check that out on my next trip. I love it. And if our listeners, if they need legal assistance from your company, it's called Triage Cancer, to help them keep their jobs, their insurance, their homes, what is the best way for our listening audience to contact you?
So on our website at triagecancer.org/gethelp, we have an intake form to our legal and financial navigation program, and anyone can reach out to us. So if someone's sitting here listening thinking like, oh, my loved one has MS and not cancer, but is dealing with some of these same issues, feel free to reach out to us. Well, we don't turn people away. And all of the things we talk about are really relevant to anybody dealing with a serious medical illness. If you go to that website at triagecancer.org, there's an intake form, answer some questions. You'll get a link in your email to schedule a call with one of our staff.
That is fantastic. Monica, thank you so much for offering all of these resources to our listeners. I know you're going to get flooded with all kinds of questions and a need for some consulting work on your part. So I really appreciate what you do. It's super important, and I'm glad you're there.
Well, right back at you. And thank you so much for having me on today.
It's our pleasure. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this talk with Monica, make sure that you like it on social media. I want you to share it with other college students on campus, whether that be your fraternity, your sorority. Have a discussion with your parents. And this could be a great video for you to play to start talking about some of the things that need to be in place to make sure that we can honor your parents' wishes and your own wishes if something unfortunate were to happen. It's so important. So thank you so much to our listeners. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks for joining us.